So the Buddha, I talked about the Buddha a little bit last night. The Buddha, the founder, or the fountainhead even of this tradition that we practice. And I was talking about how one of the epithets of the Buddha, one of the names by which he is known, is the Arahant, the free. And I was saying how the Buddha is free in a way that we are not free. So he possesses wisdom, he possesses knowledge and vision of the way things are. So another one of his epithets is he's called the Vijaya Charana Sampano. You might recognize that word from the Tiratna Vandana if you're familiar with that text, which we often chant in the morning. And that word, oh, it's a number of words strung together, means something like equipped with knowledge and practice. So he has knowledge of the way things are, and he practices or lives in accordance with the way things are. So this is the basis of the Buddha's freedom. He's all the time responding to what's really going on, not living according to a kind of secondary reality which he's created himself. So presumably this is the basis of his spontaneity. He's just able to respond because he's got no preconceptions about what should or shouldn't happen. Yeah. So on the other hand, we don't have that knowledge of the way things are, and we don't live in accordance with the way things are. So according to Buddhism, that's the kind of root, as it were, of our incarceration, of our sense of lack of freedom. So this, of course, is the emblem for this is greed, hatred, and delusion. So there's these negative mental states which all kind of reinforce each other, and they are symbolized in the Tibetan wheel of life by these three animals that bite each other's tails. So the pig of ignorance bites the tail of the cock of greed, and the cock bites the tail of the snake of hatred, and the hatred in turn bites the tail of the pig of ignorance. So there's a sense of something cyclical. So I don't want to dwell on that too long. The Buddha pointed out a way of thinking and practicing that helps us develop that knowledge and wisdom. This is a kind of good news, so to speak. So he taught a way to one who is lost. So in particular, what he said was that if you pay attention to the impermanence of things, you'll develop wisdom. And if you pay attention to the insubstantiality of things, you will develop wisdom. And if you pay attention to the unsatisfactoriness of things, you will develop wisdom. And the result of that is you'll disentangle yourself in a way that the jaws of those beasts will begin to let go of the grip of the tail of the beast in front, and eventually they'll let go altogether. So you'll disentangle yourself from that pattern. We'll free ourselves by reflecting on these three aspects of existence, these three aspects of conditioned existence, the three Lakshanas, or the three marks, or the three characteristics as they're known. So that's basically the gist of what I'm going to be talking about for the next while. And I think I wanted to start by just pointing out that I spoke about the Buddha as being free and us as being not free, and that is the situation. However, probably it's safe to say, it's true to say even, that wisdom is not completely absent from our experience. It's just that our wisdom, our understanding is partial. We understand things a little bit. We don't understand things completely. So we're starting from a point of view of things being partial. So, for example, according to the Buddha, things are impermanent, and probably we wouldn't take issue with that intellectually. We'd probably agree with that. If we thought about it, we'd probably think, well, actually, that's true. Things are impermanent. So at least on a kind of intellectual level, we see that, we understand that. But we don't see all its manifestations, and we don't live in accordance with it. That's the kind of challenge, so to speak. That's our challenge, is to try and take that partial understanding and extend it, or develop it, or broaden it. So what we can do is we can start from where we see it and work from there. So it's a bit like we need to find a kind of crack in the fabric of our delusion. And it's probably worth saying that, we sometimes feel like we're in a prison, maybe of our own making, a prison of delusion. But the wall is not as solid as we think it is. The light does break in because things are impermanent, because things are change. Light keeps kind of seeping in. It keeps finding cracks. So probably we've all had a glimpse of that. We've all, that light, the light of reality, is penetrated through a little crack in the wall of our delusion. And we've had a little glimpse of the way things really are. And that might be why you're here. It might be why you're here on this retreat, because you've seen something, you've had a glimpse of something, and you want to pursue it. You want to see if you can make that crack a little bit broader so that more light comes in. And this process is incremental. So it's not like we can do it all at once, although we might have breakthroughs, we might have moments of realization, but generally it's going to be a kind of an incremental process. So there's a little verse in the Dhammapada where the Buddha evokes this kind of the incremental or the gradual nature of spiritual practice. He says, "Do not underestimate good, thinking it will not approach me. A water pot becomes full by the constant falling of drops of water. Similarly, the wise person, little by little, fills themselves with good." Yeah, so I think part of the reason I wanted to bring that in is because there is a strong association in Buddhism of wisdom and goodness kind of being of the same nature. So the more wise we are, the more we see things as they really are, the more good we'll be, the more genuinely responsive and kind and so on. I'll say a little bit more about that later on, but I think it's something really fruitful to reflect on, that wisdom in Buddhism is, well, conjoined with compassion, and that's an important feature of it. You can't have wisdom without compassion. Anyway, so yeah, so I suppose what I'm saying here is that it's important to find out where we've got a glimpse and work from there, rather than coming at this whole topic from a sense of we don't know anything at all. In a sense, we don't, but methodologically, in terms of actually practicing, we do know something. We have got a glimpse, and we can start from there. So the Buddha is saying that things are impermanent. So the question is, well, what things is he talking about? Because very often what we need to do with a teaching like, all conditioned things are impermanent, or all things are impermanent, is take it from something that's a general statement to try and find specific instances of it that we can actually work with. So actual examples that we can begin to examine in our life and in our experience. So I wanted to talk basically under three headings, in terms of nature, external things, our self, body, feeling, emotions, and thoughts, and others, and trying to see impermanence manifesting in those different areas. So nature, self, and others. So nature. So often nature is the kind of object of awareness where we most readily see impermanence. And I think maybe part of that is because often it's really beautiful. So we're attracted to look, attracted to observe, attracted to notice. So probably we can all think of moments when we've just been particularly keenly aware of of change just by observing something in nature. So one particular moment came to me when I was thinking about this talk was I was in New Zealand, February of last year. I was in New Zealand, and I was in Wellington, which is quite a dramatic city. Wellington's set against the backdrop of a harbour, and it's very, very hilly place, and almost kind of mountainous actually. There's very jaggedy hills everywhere. And I was staying right on the east end of the city, which is kind of juts right out into Wellington Harbour. And the sun was going down over the west, and over the mountains in the west. And it was just a very, very warm, beautiful summer's evening. And you could see the clouds moving as the sun was setting. And there's that wonderful thing when you're watching a sunset that it changes incrementally, and all of a sudden you realize that the colors of the sunset have changed. You kind of, and you have the sense of something that's moving all the time, and you kind of coming in at different points and seeing the change happen. It's quite a strange thing actually. And then all of a sudden you realize that it's changed substantially to the way it was. So you're just observing this sense of change. And there was something particularly poignant about the fact I was watching these clouds and the sunset, and with the whole city kind of laying out in front of me. So you could see all the goings on of human life against this backdrop of the changing clouds and skyscape in relation to the landscape. Anyway, it's impossible to kind of evoke these experiences, but partly what I'm trying to do is just invite you to reflect on when you've experienced that kind of thing yourself. It just occurs to me actually there was a wonderful exhibition at the RHA, just at the back of Stevens's Green there. It was by Brian Eno. Some of you will know him. He used to be part of Roxy Music, and he kind of invented ambient music apparently. Anyway, so he did this installation which was ambient music, and he had these video images which were kind of in a kind of diagonal cross of these video screens, and the images he'd inputted like 1 million images or something, and there was a computer program which morphed the images into one another over time. It was really amazing. So you kind of got the sense of change happening, but it was so incremental that you almost couldn't perceive it until all of a sudden you realized that things had changed. Really fantastic. And then he had this wonderful kind of soundscape going on that was 3-dimensional as well. It's a really terrific thing. But it just had this kind of incremental change that would happen almost imperceptibly, but perceptibly enough. So anyway, getting back to nature, I mean, nature gives us these images that we can kind of sit with. We want to sit with. One little thing I've noticed recently, particularly in the last year, is that I've been walking. I live just next to the Royal Canal. It's only about 300 yards away. So I've been taking a lot of walks up the Royal Canal, and what you notice is the different flowers that come into different wildflowers that come into season. At the moment, it's these wonderful yellow irises, and just been seeing the flowers come and the flowers go over the course of a year, and now the pattern is repeating. So the yellow irises, I remember them last year, and now they're coming back this year. So you start seeing just examples of impermanence, examples of things coming into being and things passing out of being. And it seems to be the Buddha's method is to say, look, find those things that you notice that are more clearly and more obviously impermanent, and then reflect, well, other things are like that too. Other things are like that too. So you take something that's obviously impermanent, and then you just try and realize that through reflection that other things are like that as well. Things that are more apparently stable are similarly impermanent. So, for example, the Buddha gives images for that. Like he talks about bubbles. This is an image that you get all the way through the Buddhist tradition. He said, in a way, life is like a bubble. Tsongkhapa says it's like the splash of a raindrop, doesn't he? It comes into being, and then it passes out of being, and it's brief. So we can see that in relation to our body. That was the second aspect I wanted to talk about. Is, well, we say in our puja, don't we? Flowers that today are fresh and sweetly blooming, flowers that tomorrow are faded and fallen. Our bodies too, like flowers, will pass away. So we can see that over the whole course of a life, but we can also see it just in relation to our breathing. I really like the way this morning in the meditation, Maitreya just helped us just to have a moment by moment appreciation of our body and the different sensations and experiences arising in the body. And when we do that, particularly with the breath, we can see the way it comes and it goes. It comes and it goes. It arises and it passes away. And that's going on all the time. So it comes in and it goes out. And eventually, one day it's going to come in and go out and not come in again. So I know it's a bit uncomfortable, but it's impossible to talk about impermanence without mentioning at least the reality of death. And I thought I'd just read a bit of a poem actually, which expresses this very forcefully. Actually, this is by Kukai, who's a Japanese Buddhist master from a number of centuries ago, and this is what he says: "Have you not seen, oh, have you not seen, that billions have lived in China, in Japan? None have been immortal from time immemorial. Ancient sage kings or tyrants, good subjects or bad, fair ladies or homely, who could enjoy eternal youth? Noble men and lowly alike, without exception, die away. They have all died, reduced to dust and ashes. The singing halls and dancing stages have become the abode of foxes, transient as dreams, bubbles, or lightning, all are perpetual travellers." So that's an excerpt of a longer poem, and maybe we'll hear that on another time during the retreat. So that was just a few musings on the body. There's a lot more that, with all of these things, there's a lot more that you can go into, and hopefully we'll be doing that we will be doing that at other times in the retreat. Just going into this in a bit more experientially, in a bit more detail. Another aspect of our experience ongoingly is emotions, moods, feelings. I mean feelings in the sort of more general sense. And this is often really hard to remember. We get in a mood, don't we? And we kind of feel like we've been in that forever. Particularly if we're very, very happy, we forget that we've been unhappy. And if we're very, very unhappy, we forget that we've been happy. So this is one of the beautiful things actually about being on retreat, is that it's much easier to see the evanescent nature of our moods. I think it's particularly because the retreat has a rhythm to it, because the days are always the same. You can start seeing the way the mind moves a bit more easily because everything else is relatively stable. Particularly if you're on retreat for a week or more, you can see this quite clearly, just the changing nature of our moods. So again, it's just an invitation, just to see if you can notice that, to see if you can notice, and not in a way get too involved with the particular mood or particular experience that you might be having at any particular time. And then, of course, there's thoughts, just observing one's thoughts. When I say thoughts, I mean, in a way, thoughts and emotions are just different aspects of the same single experience. But isn't there a kind of a sense that images arise in our mind, thoughts about this and thoughts about that, anticipations, maybe regrets. And it's really fascinating, again, just to notice how they just arise. Just like clouds in the sky, they emerge and they might kind of change into something else, and then they might just kind of disappear. They might just kind of dissolve. I always think of that wonderful phrase on Yeats's poem. He says, "Images that yet fresh images beget." It's just a process of things changing into other things. So again, it can be really fascinating, actually, just to sit and just be with that process of thoughts arising and just noticing that they just keep coming. There's nothing fixed within that. It's just this constant process of arising and passing away. So that's just a few words about observing impermanence in our own experience, in terms of our body, in terms of our changing moods and emotions, and our changing thoughts, and just noticing that moment by moment. So I wanted to say a little bit about others, about our appreciation and our awareness of others as well in relation to impermanence. And I wanted to just start in a way by just, I suppose, inviting a reflection on particularly on what happens when aversion is present and what happens when metta is present. So it seems to me that if aversion is present, what happens is that other people become more fixed. It's as if hatred has this kind of fixing or hardening kind of function. So that particularly what happens is when we get into aversion, we fixate or we congeal on somebody's bad points or negative characteristics, at least from our perspective, and it's like we harden around that. On the other hand, if metta is present, we're much more sensitive to the whole person, and we're allowing them well to be the person that they are without us kind of fixing them down to any particular action or characteristic or quality or character trait. It's similar with craving, actually. If we're really longing for a person in a kind of neurotic way, which is different to metta, it's as if we fix those things that we appreciate about them or like about them or love about them even, and that's what that person becomes. So I think it's quite interesting to observe the kind of, in a way, emotional correspondent to deep sort of awareness of impermanence. How when we're more tuned into impermanence, there's a freeing up of our emotional experience as well. So in other words, we see other people more dynamically. We see them more as a process than as a fixed thing. And there's a lot in this, I think. I think we often make all sorts of assumptions about other people. And then what's worse is we actually believe the assumptions that we make. And I think so much of training in ethics actually is about being really aware of who it is that we're with, and trying to respond to who's actually there, rather than responding to who we think is there. There's a lot in this, but this is very much the territory of metta bhavana. But I think when you approach metta bhavana with this awareness of impermanence, it adds this whole other dimension to the practice. One of the things that metta does is it helps us to learn from other people's experience. So obviously, it's a good idea to learn from your own experience. Hopefully, that's what we're doing when we practice the Dharma. We start reflecting on the life that we have and how certain things happen as a result of what we do. And as a result of what happens to us, we start seeing there's kind of connections between things. So we start learning from our experience by reflecting on our experience in the light of truths like impermanence. But as well as that, with metta, the more sensitive we are to others, the more that we can learn from their experience as well. So again, I was just thinking of bereavement. It's just being sensitive to the fact that you might not be currently bereaved, but you will at some point. So it's an interesting thing that happens when somebody dies. Often we have a kind of a response which is usually subconscious or under the radar, as it were. But we think, oh, that's not going to happen to me. That's not going to happen to me. Which is a bit strange, but that's the way we respond. So at some level we know it is, but at another emotional level we have this attitude which is like, well, I'm an exception to that. So again, if there's with metta, you start seeing, I think, that that person's the same as me, I'm the same as them, and that changes our relationship to other people's bereavement in particular, and I think it makes us more able to be with it. So I just remember, I think I've told the story before, forgive me if you've heard it before, but I remember one particular incident which really brought this home to me. And I was having a meal at a place called Majumaloka, which is where Sangharakshita used to live, Bhante as we call him. So he's the founder of our Buddhist community. And, he's someone that you would look to, or we would look to for wisdom and spiritual maturity, I suppose you could say. And I remember having dinner with him. I was part of a team that worked in Osa was there actually, probably. Somewhere, Osa is on the screen somewhere. Anyway, we were part of what was called the sales team. We worked for this gift wholesaler that raised money for Buddhist projects. And we were sitting around having dinner with Bhante. And one of our number on our sales team was a fellow called Vajrasadhu. And he wasn't there. And then he arrived, and he just recently returned. Only I think that day or the day before, he'd come up from London and he'd been to his father's funeral. And so Vajrasadhu walked in, and I think Bhante might have met him before and knew him a bit. And I can't remember exactly how the exchange happened, but Vajrasadhu said, "Oh, well, I've just come back from London where I attended my father's funeral." And I think I had this kind of expectation that Bhante would be able to kind of do something kind of magic and make that all right. And he just said, "Oh, I'm really sorry to hear that," or something like really, really everyday, or just a sort of a very human kind of response to the fact that Vajrasadhu's father had passed away. And I kind of realized that there's no kind of magicking this away. It's a much deeper thing about being with, be able to be with the reality of death and bereavement. Hopefully that comes across. I mean, sometimes you tell a story like that and you think, is this coming across? But it was just a particular moment for me personally where I realized that, yeah, it was just a part of life. And, Buddhism wasn't trying to kind of magic that away. It was much more about changing the relationship with that experience. Poignantly, actually, Vajrasadhu himself died not too long ago. Some of you guys might have met him. I know at least a couple of you will have. So I just wanted to mention that, that with metta we can see and be with and acknowledge and accept those realities of human experience, whether our experience or other people's experience. So that's a bit on impermanence in relation to, well, seeing it through awareness of the natural world, seeing it through an awareness of ourself, and seeing it through an awareness of other people. I wanted to talk a little bit about insubstantiality. I'm going to talk about insubstantiality and unsatisfactoriness a little bit more briefly. So if we reflect on this notion of impermanence, if we think about it, what it suggests is that a certain thing exists for a while and then it's not there anymore. Yeah. So a certain thing comes into being, it exists for a while, and then it's not there anymore. So things are only ever relatively stable. They're never absolutely stable. So things are, I can't say it any better than that. So we assume a stability that's not there. So this seems to be the mistake that we make, that we see that something's relatively stable and we assume that it's actually completely stable. So again, this is the way that our awareness of impermanence is partial. So we assume that there's some kind of real object or entity that stands behind the flow of phenomena, experience, and that's what this mark of insubstantiality is asking us to question, really, to question that this assumption of some kind of substantial entity lying behind experience, or within experience, or under experience, or above experience. So this is why the Buddha, that the actual term for this is anatman, which means something like not self or not soul, that there's no thing behind or above or within. There's this dynamic process unfolding moment by moment. I was thinking about this, and what it reminded me of is an experience of probably we've all had this experience where there's a big event coming up, something that we've been working towards maybe for a number of years even. So I had the most striking experience of this when I studied music for 3 years, and at the end of the 3 years, you did a recital, and the recital basically would provide you with your mark, like your grade for the whole of that 3-year period. So it was quite an intense thing that you're working towards, and it was live. In other words, you couldn't plan it for it. It wasn't like writing a dissertation where you could kind of do it incrementally. It was happening live. So that, I think it was 50 minutes or something. That 50-minute period of time when I played 5 tunes. It was a jazz course that I was doing that would provide the kind of summation of this whole 3-year period. And when you're younger, which I was at the time, 3 years feels like a really, really long time. So I remember moving into this recital, working towards it, and having this really strange experience of actually being in the recital. And as I was playing, I was aware of the fact that all this work that I'd done was just sort of unfolding right there and then it was gone. It was really weird, actually. Particularly because I suppose with jazz, I mean, it is improvised music, so it's kind of arising in the moment, and then it's sort of passing away. And it was over in a flash. It was a really weird experience, actually. So slightly disconcerting. But we've probably all had that experience of something that's been hugely important, and then you're in it all of a sudden, and then all of a sudden it's finished, and you're looking back at it. So that diploma recital, that thing that entity which I was thinking about, it wasn't anywhere. It was just a whole series of experiences and sounds. So I think part of the reason I mentioned that, because I think we can work quite directly with this awareness of insubstantiality by when things loom really large for us, by just breaking them down into their component parts and just sort of making a start, and then life becomes kind of manageable. It's when we think of it as a big lump, a big thing, that it starts becoming, well, overwhelming perhaps. So we just need to keep chipping away, making a start. So the Buddha, when he talks about insubstantiality, one of the images he gives for it is a lump of foam on the Ganges River. And just referring to the canal again, one of the things that people like to do around here is but dumping a whole bottle of detergent into the lock gate at the canal. I don't know why, but obviously it produces a lot of foam. I do feel a bit sorry for the fish and the birds, but anyway, that's what happens. So you get this foam floating down the canal, particularly at the lock gates where there's the kind of waterfall effect. And the Buddha's saying that, that form, that what we perceive is like that, is like foam. So I'll just actually give you a little excerpt from a Pali sutta where the Buddha evokes this image. He says, monks. So he's talking to his disciples, to monks. Monks, suppose that this river Ganges was carrying along a great lump of foam. A man with good sight would inspect it, ponder it, and carefully investigate it, and it would appear to him to be hollow, void, insubstantial. For what substance could there be in a lump of foam? So too, monks, whatever kind of form there is, whether past, future, or present, internal or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, a monk inspects it, ponders it, and carefully investigates it, and it would appear to him to be void, hollow, insubstantial. for what substance could there be in form? So again, the Buddha's taking just a very everyday, very concrete image and saying everything's like that in this particular way. And notice he says, and inspect it, ponder it, and carefully investigate it. So, yeah, the Buddha's asking us, or encouraging us even, exhorting us even to really examine what's actually going on. Now, this, of course, is where awareness comes in and integration comes in, because we need to be able to concentrate to be able to do that really effectively. We need to be able to be wholly there. If we're distracted, we won't have sufficient power, as it were, in our examination to really see through the surface of what is there. So again, a retreat is just a fantastic opportunity to do that. So we can find out what we're interested in, and particularly, for example, in the meditation, and examine it in terms of, what's really going on here, and try and see it as if it's a lump of foam. So that's just a little bit on insubstantiality. So what I'm saying is that insubstantiality is like a deeper appreciation of impermanence, where we start to question the notion of the thing that's impermanent and start seeing that thing is itself insubstantial. Hopefully you get what I mean. I'm just trying to get a conversation going, really. We're going to go into breakout rooms after this. So if this isn't all immediately clear, we can discuss it a little bit more. So I wanted to say something about unsatisfactoriness, and just briefly, and actually what I wanted to do is just read a quote. This is a little bit from Sangharakshita's A Survey of Buddhism, which relates the characteristic of unsatisfactoriness to the other, particularly to impermanence. So this is what he says. If it were possible to remold the sorry scheme of things nearer to the heart's desire, and if the impermanent could by some magic of transmutation be made permanent, then there might not be any harm in our enjoying this or that object of the senses. But things being constituted as they are, the objects of enjoyment disintegrate in our very grasp, as ice melts when clasped in a warm hand, and the result is suffering. Happiness can be attained either when existence accords with our desires, or when our desires are in harmony with existence. True, the second alternative is difficult, but the first is impossible. If we cannot gain happiness by refashioning the world, we shall have to find it by reforming ourselves. Compound things are indeed painful because they are impermanent, but that impermanency is not so much the cause as the occasion of our suffering. The root cause is desire. Happiness comes only when we desire and are attached to nothing, and that happiness is eternal. So the Buddha is Sugata. I mentioned that last night. That's one of his epithets. He's the happily gone or the happily attained. So he's no longer expecting something from life which it can't give. And that's freedom, and that's happiness. So this is a progressive path, as I mentioned earlier. We can't take it in all at once. And it includes, this kind of perspective includes ethics and meditation. And one of the things I was reflecting on just as I was talking was that things come into being and things pass away again. And what that allows for is something coming into being which hasn't come into being before at all. So a completely new element, a completely new factor emerging into the flow of our lives. And that's really, what the Buddha is the emblem of. The Buddha is the emblem of that new element, that fresh element, that completely other element emerging within the stream of our own life. So I think it's very, very important to remember that we're not talking about things just arising and ceasing on their own level. We're talking about a progressive path that's like a spiraling upwards towards this kind of inconceivable emancipation, which is how the freedom of the Buddha is described. And it is an incremental process. And I just heard this little poem on the radio that some of you might have heard. It's on RTE at the moment. It's an Emily Dickinson poem, which I thought was particularly apt. So I'm just gonna, I'll just read the poem in a second, but I just wanted to say that the Vimoksha themselves, these gateways to liberation, emerge when we engage deeply with these three marks of conditioned existence, with the impermanence, the insubstantiality, and the unsatisfactoriness of conditioned things. So I'm going to talk about those tomorrow morning. Yeah, just to let you know about that. So I'll just finish with this little poem, which just again highlights that the truth it can be dazzling. This is what Emily says: tell all the truth, but tell it slant. Tell all the truth, but tell it slant. Success in circuit lies. Too bright for our infirm delight is the truth's superb surprise. As lightning to the children eased with explanation kind, the truth must dazzle gradually, or every man be blind. I'll just read that again because I didn't do a very good job of it. Tell all the truth, but tell it slant. Success in circuit lies. Too bright for our infirm delight, the truth's superb surprise. As lightning to the children eased with explanation kind, the truth must dazzle gradually, or every man be blind.